My name is Rachel Kim. And 2 years ago, I walked out of my office on the 37th floor of a midtown high-rise and never went back. At the time, I was a senior analyst at Grayson & Bell, one of the biggest investment firms in Manhattan, pulling 6 figures before I even turned 26. From the outside, everything looked perfect: steady promotions, tailored suits, a Soho apartment, even lunch invites from partners who used to forget my name. But the truth is, I felt like I was living someone else's dream. Every quarter felt like a performance review for a life I didn't want. Every success weighed down by a quiet voice asking, "Is this really it?" I remember the moment, clearly: coffee in one hand, resignation letter in the other, and a kind of stillness that comes when you realize your life is about to split in two. No one saw it coming. Not my parents, who still bragged to their friends that I was the family's first Wall Street hire. Not my friends, who texted me screenshots of my LinkedIn like it was breaking news. And definitely not my ex, who told me I was being reckless when I first mentioned I had an idea for something called Mind Shift. Mind Shift didn't exist yet. It wasn't a company. It wasn't even a pitch deck. It was just a sketch in a journal and a feeling that maybe, just maybe, there was a better way to help kids who were falling behind, not because they lacked intelligence, but because no one had ever taught them in a way that made sense to them. I didn't quit my job because I had a safety net. I quit because I knew I wouldn't last another year pretending I was okay, chasing numbers that didn't mean anything to me. I traded catered dinners for grocery store sandwiches, elevator rides for bus transfers, and titles for late nights, writing code I barely understood yet. But the strange thing was, I finally felt awake. Everyone thought I was spiraling. My mom cried on the phone more than she spoke. My dad asked if I'd been fired, and I didn't blame them. From their perspective, I was torching the best parts of my future. But what they didn't see, what they couldn't see, was that for the first time, I was choosing a life that felt like mine. This isn't a story about dramatic exits or revenge. It's about what happens when you stop performing for people who were never meant to understand you. When you stop asking for permission and start building in silence. It didn't happen overnight. And I'm not going to pretend it was easy. But looking back, that moment in the elevator, when the doors closed behind me and I didn't press any floor button, I knew I wasn't falling. I was finally letting go. And what came next? Well, let's just say, no one in my family was ready for what I was about to build. I landed in Boston just past noon. The sky gray, like it always seemed to be when something heavy was about to happen. My carry-on dragged behind me through Logan's familiar terminal. But the weight I felt wasn't in the suitcase. It was in the invitation or summons. Really, to a family meeting marked urgent. Sent 2 days before. The car service Mom arranged was waiting. Engine humming too smoothly. I climbed in and stared out the window as the houses shifted from urban brick to polished suburbia. Every corner whispered something I had outgrown. When the car stopped in front of the house, I paused before getting out. The front lawn was trimmed. The hedges sculpted like always. But it all looked staged now. Like the perfect backdrop for something deeply wrong. Inside, the air smelled of lavender polish and old expectations. The living room had been transformed. The coffee table replaced by a sleek conference table. Bottled water lined in precise rows. A whiteboard. Laptops. It looked more like the prep room for a startup pitch than a family gathering. Dad sat at the head of the table. Posture straight. Face unreadably. My sister Emily and her husband Josh were on one side. Hands folded. Their expressions stiff with polite concern. Mom stood near the window. Arms crossed. Lips pressed in what she probably thought was a neutral line. No hugs. No warmth. Just presence. I didn't sit right away. My eyes scanned the room like a detective surveying a crime scene. Everything was too coordinated. This wasn't spontaneous worry. It was a planned campaign. "Rachel," Dad said. We're all here because we care about you. That line. It was always the opener. The gentle disarm before the first strike. You walked away from an incredible opportunity. Mon continued. Her tone clipped, like a keynote speech. A career most people would give anything for. Now you're chasing something that doesn't even have a defined market. I took the only empty seat. It was velvet-backed and firmer than I remembered. I sat tall, spine straight, shoulders level. I wasn't here to collapse. Josh leaned forward, his voice too smooth. We've looked at the startup space. Education tech is saturated. And without a clear path to monetization, it's just aspirational. I smiled without smiling. That word, aspirational, a euphemism for naive. Dad laced his fingers and leaned in. You've always been the smart one, the one who got things done. So why throw it all away now? His voice wasn't angry. It was disappointed. That made it worse. Emily added that she missed me. That they all did. That they just wanted to understand. But her eyes said something else. They said, "What happened to the version of you we used to be proud of?" I thought of all the nights I'd stayed up debugging the first prototype. Of the survey data from struggling high school students who said our product made them feel seen for the first time. I thought of the quiet phone calls with immigrant parents thanking us for adapting the curriculum to their kids' learning pace. I thought of everything they didn't know because they never asked. But I didn't say any of that. Not yet. Instead, I listened as they continued. Emily talked about our cousin Mark, who just bought a house in Cambridge. Josh mentioned someone he knew who joined an AI firm that just got acquired. Dad said I still had time to return to the fold. To them, my absence was still something temporary. A glitch to be corrected. They weren't asking what I believed in. They were asking when I'd give up. It hit me then that this wasn't a conversation. It was a performance. I was cast as the lost daughter. And they were reading lines they'd rehearsed. They weren't looking for truth. They were looking for confirmation that I regretted it all. That I missed the comfort of the life I abandoned. But I didn't miss it. I missed being seen. I looked around the room. Took in every polished shoe and familiar gesture. And in that moment, I realized something that would shape every word I chose moving forward. They weren't worried about me. They were worried I might succeed without them. So I leaned back, folded my hands, and let the silence settle. They had no idea the story they thought they were writing had already changed chapters. I had simply stopped giving them the pen. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I just leaned back in the chair, looked at each of them, and said quietly, "There's something you should probably know." The room didn't shift right away. Dad was still rubbing his forehead. Brooklyn checked her phone like she was waiting for someone else to rescue the conversation. Jason tried to maintain his polished posture. But his eyes flicked toward me, like he already sensed he'd misjudged something. The thing I left Wall Street for. It wasn't just some personal experiment or a passion project. I co-founded a company 2 years ago. It's called MindShift. It's an AI-powered adaptive learning platform for students who are often left behind by standardized education. Nobody said a word. I reached into my bag and pulled out my tablet. I didn't wave it around or try to impress anyone. I tapped the screen once and waited for the silence to deepen. The demo interface lit up. Soft and sleek. Designed for real classrooms. Not venture decks. Not theory. Usage reports from school districts filled the dashboard. Names they'd recognize if they'd been paying attention. MindShift has been implemented in 47 public schools so far. Across California, Oregon, and Illinois. Student performance among ESL learners improved by over 40% within the first 6 months. We just signed our first international contract with a learning board in Canada. Still, no one moved. I didn't look for validation. I kept going. We closed a Series C round last month, $250 million. Led by Helios Ventures. Oversubscribed. Finalized in 11 days. I shifted my gaze to Jason. He had stopped blinking. His mouth was slightly open, like he wanted to interrupt but couldn't figure out how. I've also been overseeing an internal investment arm. We created it to fund early-stage edtech ideas that align with our mission. The capital fund sits under Mindshift's holding structure. Maybe that name rings a bell. Mindshift Capital. Jason finally blinked. His expression cracked. Just enough for me to see it. He looked over at Brooklyn like he needed backup. But she only swallowed and sat still. I looked at him directly. You submitted an application to us last month. Didn't you under Elevate Core? Pitching for Series A. You called it a game-changing hybrid learning platform. But the numbers didn't hold. He opened his mouth. Then closed it. I went on. The review flagged inconsistencies in your unit economics. The projections weren't supported by market traction. And your CAC to LTV ratio was padded. It didn't pass. So we passed. Jason finally spoke, barely above a whisper. That wasn't you. You didn't review it. No, I didn't. Our team did. But I read the internal notes after it was rejected. Because when someone sends in a pitch and also talks down to me in the same week, I like to keep the full picture in view. His face went pale. Brooklyn glanced between us like she couldn't believe what she was watching. You called my company a vanity project in an email. Said it was probably some feminist tech fantasy built on narrative. Not numbers. Funny thing. It's the narrative that built the numbers. No one moved. No one even exhaled. Aunt Linda cleared her throat. Her voice soft. Rachel. This is. I don't think anyone realized. Exactly. You didn't realize. Because no one asked. Not once in 2 years. Not when I was working 16-hour days building something from zero. Not when I skipped holidays to meet pilot deadlines. You assumed silence meant failure. But I chose silence because I didn't need to explain every step of my path to people who were already writing the ending for me. My mother finally spoke. Her voice barely held shape. Why didn't you tell us? I looked at her calmly. Because you would have tried to stop me. Or worse. I tried to shape it into something you understood. But innovation doesn't wait for understanding. It demands conviction. I placed the tablet face down on the table. Mindshift isn't just functional. It's effective. We've published in 2 peer-reviewed journals. We're collaborating with MIT's lab for multilingual AI systems next quarter. Jason was still staring at me like he didn't recognize the person sitting in front of him. Maybe he didn't. Maybe he'd never cared enough to try. This wasn't about ego. It was about control. For once, the control was mine, and I had earned every ounce of it without needing a single cheer from this table. I leaned back. Relax now. The moment had passed. The air in the room was different. Like everyone had just realized, they were no longer speaking to the version of me they'd constructed. So, Jason, if you're still raising funds, I'd recommend tightening your numbers. And next time, maybe avoid sending internal notes to your investors that assume no one's reading them. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. That was the moment the power shifted. Quietly. Without shouting. Just truth. Delivered in full. I didn't want revenge. I wanted recognition. But I'd spent so long moving without it that I no longer needed it. And that's what made it hit harder. I wasn't the girl they dismissed 2 years ago. I was the one deciding who gets to enter the room. Sure. Here is the content for. I looked across the table and realized not one of them had ever asked me what I'd actually been doing. Not once in the last 2 years. Not even out of polite curiosity. They had built their assumptions around the silence, shaping a narrative where I was simply lost. I took a breath, stood up slowly, and walked to my bag. When I pulled out the tablet, I didn't raise my voice or adjust the lighting. I just tapped the screen and let the Mindshift dashboard fill the air with numbers, colors, and charts they didn't recognize. The system scanned in real time, adapting based on simulated student behavior. The room quieted, not from shock, but from slow understanding. These aren't theoretical projections. These are performance stats from 83 public schools across California, Oregon, and Texas. The numbers showed a 42% improvement in student comprehension over 6 months. I said it plainly. Not to impress them, but to finally bring the truth into the room where it should have been all along. My mother blinked at the slide. Her hand still wrapped around a wine glass she hadn't touched. My father adjusted his posture like he was back in a boardroom, trying to calculate what all of this meant. Brooklyn stared at the interface. Lips parted just slightly, like she'd forgotten how to speak. No one interrupted. I kept going. Our AI model adapts to each student's behavior in real time. It predicts where they'll struggle, when their attention drops, and even which learning format works best: video, text, interaction. We call it personalized cognition alignment. I glanced toward Jason, who sat with his jaw clenched so tight I thought he might crack a molar. The next slide showed a growth curve. Our tech had been integrated into multiple districts, and more were lined up. I ended the demo without a grand finale. Just a quiet pause. I looked up and met their eyes one by one. If you had asked me what I was doing instead of what I was ruining, you might have known this sooner. Aunt Rachel exhaled, scribbling something on her notepad. My dad rubbed his forehead. Maybe out of stress. Maybe out of shame. Brooklyn looked down at her lap, as if trying to find a version of me she could still label as naive. I sat back down and reached for my water. Then my phone buzzed. Not the usual vibration. It was the short, "Fiam Tony has sate for Grant." Just 2 words lit up the screen. It's live. I already knew what it meant. I opened the article on my phone, tilted the screen so the table could see it, and placed it down in front of them. My name was the headline. Rachel Kim, Arshaba, co-founder and CEO of Mindshift, a company now valued at $1.6 billion. A company dismissed as a side project. A company they thought would bankrupt me. The photo beside the headline was a shot of me from last month's demo day in San Diego. Hand on the tablet. Eyes focused on the screen like I could already see what came next. Jason leaned forward and picked up my phone without asking. He read in silence, color draining from his face. Brooklyn looked again like she was trying to reconcile memory with fact. My father let out a slow breath. And for once, he didn't try to speak. No one did. I took my phone back, finished my water, and stood again. You keep assuming I've been hiding because I was ashamed. But I stayed quiet because I knew talking wouldn't change anything. Not until I had something undeniable to show you. And now I do. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was stripped of resistance. Almost peaceful. The kind of silence that says, we have nothing left to say because the facts are finally louder than the opinions. I looked at my mother one last time. She hadn't moved. She used to ask how I was living. What did my apartment look like? How much was I earning? What was I doing with my degree? I never answered. Not because I didn't want to, but because the question was never truly meant to understand. It was meant to evaluate. I started walking toward the kitchen. I didn't slam doors or wait for dramatic responses. I opened the cookie tin like it was a Tuesday. Not a moment of reckoning. My phone buzzed again as I bit into the almond shortbread. This time, it wasn't Grant. It was CNN. Rachel Kim. The headline said. The woman who turned silence into a billion-dollar ecosystem? I read it once, smiled quietly, and walked back into the living room. My family looked at me like I had come back from a place they thought no one could survive. I was never gone. I was just building. And they never asked. The morning after the meeting with my family, I stepped into the Mindshift office as if nothing had happened. The glass doors slid open with the same gentle hiss. The same scent of brewed coffee hovered in the air. And my desk sat exactly as I'd left it, neat, grounded, and real. I hung my coat, slid into my chair, and opened the schedule Grant had finalized for the day. Calls poured in nonstop from the moment the Business Monthly feature dropped. A few congratulated me. A few asked for quotes. And many were the same names that once redirected my emails to assistants. The irony didn't sting anymore. I had moved past, needing their approval long ago. Hannah from Communications stopped by before lunch, holding her phone with a puzzled look. A former investor I'd pitched to 2 years back had emailed her directly, asking for a meeting with me. He once called our vision premature and told me to return when I had a real product. Now he wanted to discuss alignment opportunities. I told her to schedule him for Friday afternoon and kept my voice neutral. When he arrived, he looked different, less polished. A little more humbled. He came prepared with a deck, market projections, and even a small gift bag I didn't bother to open. He spoke for 10 minutes straight before I said a word. I listened patiently, then asked one question. Why now? He stammered something about timing and alignment, about my proven track record and momentum. I nodded slowly, thanked him for his time, and told him we weren't exploring new partnerships in that direction. I offered no further explanation. Some doors, once closed, stay that way. After he left, I stood by the window overlooking Lake Union, hands resting against the glass. A few team members passed behind me, chatting quietly about a school district onboarding session. They had no idea what that meeting had meant, how much ground I had gained just by saying no. The afternoon moved quickly with back-to-back calls, internal reviews, and a final round of testing on our adaptive learning interface. Every screen, every dashboard we had built was not just code, it was proof. Proof that silence wasn't surrender. It was shelter. It gave me the room to think wildly and work deeply, without having to translate every dream into terms others would find acceptable. At 6:30 p.m., I turned off my monitor and sat back in my chair. The room dimmed as the sun dropped behind the buildings. No applause. No public pat on the back. Just the rhythm of my own breath and the clarity that comes when you stop waiting for validation. I didn't need to be seen. I needed to keep building. And that, I realized, was the entire point. Rachel was reviewing pilot program results when Maya walked in. Her step softer than usual. She paused near the edge of my desk and said my sister was downstairs. Brooklyn. No appointment. No heads up. Just sitting quietly in the side lounge near the staff kitchen, with a notebook clutched in both hands like it could explain everything. She's been waiting over 2 hours. Maya added. And I didn't ask why. I just closed my laptop, smoothed the crease in my blouse, and told her to send Brooklyn to meeting room 3. No coffee. Coffee is for people we welcome, not those who remember you only when their world begins to crack. 10 minutes later, I walked in. Brooklyn looked up fast like she thought I might disappear if she blinked. Her heels were off, tucked neatly under the chair, and her hair, once flawlessly styled, was unraveling near the nape of her neck. That alone told me more than any email ever could. She stood right away. You're finally seeing me. That means you need something from me, I said, and sat across from her. Brooklyn hesitated, then said it wasn't just about work. So it is about work. I cut in, and she lowered her eyes. Jason is trying to find an educational partner, she said. His new startup didn't meet enrollment targets. The only way to secure funding is if they can partner with someone credible. Someone like Mindshift. She wasn't begging. Not exactly. But her voice had the tremble of someone too proud to grovel but too desperate not to. I crossed my arms slowly. Jason once called Mindshift a demo product in an investor meeting. His email to the Chicago group labeled us a feminist fantasy dressed as tech. Did he think I wouldn't find out? Brooklyn looked down. Her silence in that moment spoke louder than any defense. You don't deserve that, she said finally. You built something that works. And I know that now. I'm sorry. Rachel. My tone didn't soften. Jason didn't just belittle my work. He belittled me. And you stood beside him. At dinners. At parties. In every silence where someone should have spoken. You let it happen. I'm trying to make it right. She said quickly. Not just for Jason. I want us to be sisters again. I know what I lost. I looked at her. And the sadness wasn't bitterness. It was distance. Me standing on a ground I had paved. And her still unsure where to place her feet. You know what hurt the most? I asked. My voice low and sharp. It wasn't that you didn't help. It was that you watched them strip me of belief and said nothing. She started to speak. But I raised a hand. As for the partnership? It's not happening. Brooklyn's face cracked. You're really cutting us off. I shook my head. I'm not cutting anyone off. I'm choosing what belongs. And this doesn't. Not anymore. She sat quietly. No more words. Just the quiet of someone realizing that not all doors reopen. Not even with shared blood. I stood. You can leave. Or stay in this room for hours like before. But I won't be the one holding the door open. I stepped out and didn't look back. When I returned to my office, Maya leaned close. Should I arrange a car for her? I kept my gaze on the screen. No. She knows the way home. And if she doesn't, it's time she learns. I wasn't expecting anyone that morning. Especially not him. Maya stepped in quietly and said someone had been sitting in the lobby for over an hour. He hadn't spoken to anyone. Just sat still in the leather chair near the window. When she said his name, I felt my spine lock. I checked the camera feed from my desk. There he was. Coat wrinkled. Briefcase on his lap. Looking like a man who no longer let a room with his presence. I told her to send him up. 10 minutes later, my father walked into my office for the first time. His eyes scanned the space. Not with judgment but with curiosity. He paused in front of the framed press feature on the wall. The one from our Berlin Education Summit. His shoulders sank a little as he took it in. I motioned to the chair across from mine. He didn't sit right away. Instead, he placed his briefcase on the table, slowly unlatched it, and pulled out a thick stack of papers held together with a binder clip. He had printed out everything. Articles, interviews, blog posts, product demos, the funding roadmap we shared with investors, even my first LinkedIn post announcing the soft launch 2 years ago. I waited. Not because I needed to hear anything, but because I could tell he had come to say something real. When he finally spoke, his voice wasn't firm or rehearsed. It was quiet. Tired. He said he never believed in things he couldn't understand. He said watching me walk away from everything the family had worked for felt like a betrayal. But he admitted, now, that maybe the betrayal was his. Because when I was a kid building a neural network science fair project in 5th grade, he skipped the showcase for a meeting in Boston. He thought I wouldn't remember. But I always did. He said he never read my early writing because he thought if I wasn't following the family path, it didn't matter. He apologized for that. Not with excuses. Just facts. I didn't nod. I didn't cry. I just listened. Because after all these years of silence, this wasn't about closure. This was about effort. Was he here to listen or to reclaim pride? I asked him why he printed everything. He said it felt more real that way. He said reading online made it feel like I was still far away. But holding the papers reminded him that I built something solid. I watched him hold a graph showing student improvement from our AI model. His eyes lingered on the numbers longer than I expected. He asked if we could talk again. Properly. Not as investor and founder. Not even as father and daughter. Just two people trying to understand what they missed. He told me the family wanted to host a dinner. Not to question me but to listen. And they wanted to do it here. At Mindshift. Where everything had begun. I didn't give him an answer right away. I just turned on the screen behind me and showed him Nova Echo. Our next-gen multilingual education platform. I walked him through its capabilities. The real-time behavioral feedback. The algorithm adjustments. The deployment plan in Asia. He followed every word. Not like a man checking a box. but like someone who knew he didn't deserve a second shot but still showed up anyway. He stood to leave, then paused and looked at me directly. He said he knew Brooklyn had stayed quiet when Jason mocked our work. He said his firm was reviewing Jason's financial filings now. And whatever consequences came, there would be no interference. I nodded once. He didn't ask for forgiveness. Just permission to come back the right way. He left without asking for anything more. No hug. No promises. Just a card placed on my desk with the words Friday. 7:00 p.m. on it. He said the whole family would be on time. And if I said yes, they'd be ready to listen. I sat at my desk long after he left, watching the light shift across the floor. I didn't feel proud. I didn't feel relieved. I just felt still. And that, somehow, was enough. The elevator doors opened right at 6:59 p.m. I stood in the glass hallway outside the presentation room. 2 framed images behind me on the wall. One was the cover of Business Monthly, with my face under the headline Carter, the woman transforming education. The other, a faded childhood photo of me at a science fair, standing beside a crude clay model of a brain. It was the first thing I ever built to explain how we learn. One by one, they stepped in. My father was first, this time in simple khakis and a button-down shirt. No polished watch or cufflinks in sight. My mother followed, hair tied back in a neat bun. No heavy jewelry. No loud presence, just eyes quietly scanning the room. Brooklyn came last. She wore flats. No makeup. No handbag. Just a plain notebook, held close to her chest, like it was the only thing anchoring her to the moment. I didn't say a word. I simply raised my hands slightly and motioned them into the demo hall. The lights dimmed as I tapped the control panel and launched the showcase. No speeches. No explanations. I let the system speak. The smartboard came to life with real-time data pulled from over 90 schools. Heat maps showed student progress. A dashboard visualized how our adaptive model responded to individual learning patterns. My voice was steady, not proud in the boastful sense, but certain of every word. No one interrupted. For the first time in years, no one cut me off. They just watched each face absorbing more than they knew how to express. When I switched to the testimonial reel, the room stayed quiet. Students from our first pilot school spoke directly into the camera. One girl said she no longer felt stupid in class. A boy said he could finally study without anxiety. I let that sit for a full 5 seconds before moving on. I ended with one simple slide. We're not just improving education. We're redesigning how humans learn. Then I turned and looked at them not as family, but as people who once didn't see me. My father stepped forward. His voice came out low but even. He said from now on, every board meeting at his firm would leave one seat empty. That seat, he said, would symbolize the voices they failed to hear in time. He looked at me when he said it, and I saw the weight of it wasn't just for show. My mother stood still. She didn't cry. She didn't apologize. But her posture softened just slightly, like a wall was slowly starting to lower. Brooklyn didn't speak. She just nodded once, almost to herself, and sat down. I didn't fill the silence. I let it stretch. Let it breathe. Because for once, they weren't trying to control the room. They were letting the room change them. That, more than anything they could say, was enough for now. The office was quiet again. Late afternoon sunlight stretched across the floor, soft and golden, casting long shadows over the edge of my desk. I slipped off my shoes and walked toward the far wall, where the photo hung untouched for months. It was me at 10 years old, standing in front of a science fair poster with a cardboard neural network taped together by too much glue. My hair was a mess. My glasses too big. And my eyes lit up like someone had just told me I could build anything. I stood there for a long moment, not smiling, just remembering. That little girl didn't know how many rooms she'd walk into, only to be ignored. She didn't know how many people would try to shrink her ideas into boxes that already had names. But she also didn't know how far she'd go once she stopped asking anyone for permission. I sat back down at my desk, fingers grazing the edges of the printed blueprint labeled Mindshift Global. It was clean, but précis, filled with color-coded routes into regions across Canada, Japan, and Singapore. We'd spent months preparing every step, and now the only thing left was to begin. There was no one to impress anymore. No meetings to rehearse in front of a mirror. Just work that mattered, and a version of myself that no longer needed applause to move forward. I didn't need a headline. I didn't need a spotlight. I needed this quiet moment with a younger version of me still taped to the wall. Proof that belief had always been there. I pressed my hand lightly on the desk, steadying the blueprint beneath my palm. Not to ground myself, but to remind myself that this story didn't need to be told out loud to be real. It was already written into every decision, every late night, every time I chose to keep going when it would have been easier to stop. No one gets to define what success looks like for you. Not family, not the crowd, not the people who once called you lost. The only voice that matters is the one that whispers, even after all this, we're not done yet. If you've ever been the one they doubted, the one who took the longer road, the one who walked away from what made sense to everyone else but never quite felt right to you, this story was for you. Because sometimes the hardest thing isn't failing. It's being misunderstood by the people you love the most. Maybe you've had to build something in silence. Maybe you're still in the middle of that quiet climb. If that's you, I just want to say your story matters. Even if no one claps right now. I'd love to hear your journey. Have you ever been told you were making a mistake? Only to prove them wrong in your own time. Share it in the comments. I read every word. And if this story stayed with you, even a little, hit subscribe. There's more coming. Not just about success, but about the strength it takes to walk your own way.